Now that the 2024 fantasy football regular season and playoffs are over, here are the 6 players we need to be stashing on our bench in our Dynasty rosters as soon as possible, while everybody else is out sleeping and not thinking twice about their team for another 6 months. If this video found you, please continue that favor and hit that like button, possibly even subscribe if you guys are new. This channel is starting from the ground up and we will continue to post videos all through the year. The number 1 player and sleeper that we need to be putting on our rosters and stashing this very second is going to be Malik Washington, only rostered in 37% of leagues. I don't understand that. It needs to be 90 at the very least. This is a 24-year-old rookie coming out of Virginia, where he posted 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns in his last season there before entering the NFL draft. Comes in, he doesn't have the highest draft capital, which is kind of what we want when we're looking at Dynasty fantasy football players when you look at a time frame at a 2, 3, 4 year range. But the reason he's in this video is because Tyreek Hill wants out. Now, I'm not going to get into that whole situation because if you're on this video, you probably already know what's going on with that. But we also have Jalen Ramsey testing those waters and possibly leaving the team in the offseason as well. The Dolphins could be going through a mini rebuild for the future here coming very soon. So there is a chance for Malik Washington. This is a high-powered offense that we want to be buying into. High-powered, I guess, as much as you can get. Tua is the quarterback here. They're 8th in passing attempts. That's going to be there. The chances are all you need for these Dynasty guys that we're stashing. When you see a guy like Tyreek possibly walk, Jalen Waddle has never really been able to stay healthy in his NFL career. You can't just throw 15 targets a game to Devon Achane and call it a day. The ball has to go somewhere, and Tyreek, he does have $30 million guaranteed. From a business perspective, it makes the most sense to keep him on the team, but we know Tyreek, he doesn't care about any of that. If he wants to leave, he's going to find a way out, and I see it as very unlikely that he is on this team in a 2-year window. So Malik Washington is one of these stashes that has actually showed something in his chances for the games this year. He had 4 games where he saw over a 45% snap share at the end of the season in his last 4 games. When we look at that and isolate it, he's averaging 4 receptions a game and 42.3 yards in those contests. Now, that's not crazy, that's not amazing, but there's a reason he's still available to be stashed. In the back third of these NFL seasons, especially for young guys and rookies, it really does paint a picture for what we can expect, or at least the role that we're looking at for the next year coming. And you look at his player profile, he's in the 96th percentile in speed. He plays a good relative amount of his snaps in the slot, which generally earns you more targets. We know that to be a fact, and it all fits great when you look at this team. He's playing with a coach and a scheme that prioritizes speed, playmaking ability. That's exactly what he can do. Now he's valued at the wide receiver 83. That is essentially a free stash. That's almost guaranteed to return your value. But if you have a ton of wide receivers on your team, maybe you don't need him or just don't have the room, a no-name running back that we can go get and should be stashing as soon as possible is Marshawn Lloyd. He's going to be your guy. In the beginning of last season, he was building a ton of hype. He jumped up 33 draft spots from the fantasy football consensus drafts. Like, that's a really big jump and shows that he has some kind of value. The Packers drafted him in the 3rd round after going out and acquiring Josh Jacobs. Again, that proves to you he probably has some kind of role in the future. If it doesn't pan out in 1 year, that's not really his fault. And we've seen how good a dual threat running back system has worked for the Packers in the previous years. A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones were running that backfield for the longest time. It was very efficient and it worked well for them. But Lloyd never got to live up to that hype that we were expecting from last season because of all of his injuries. He had a hip, a hamstring, an ankle, his appendix even burst. Like, it can't get any worse than that. He did not catch a break. It is not his fault that he couldn't play, causing him to only see the field 1 time in week 2 against the Colts, where he saw 6 carries on 10 total snaps played. Like, he was on the field for 10 plays. He got the ball on 6 of them. That's pretty good involvement right there. But the narrative for his dynasty path is always going to be, what about Emmanuel Wilson? This is the guy that's the RB2. He acted as that complimentary back behind Josh Jacobs this year. Lloyd was on IR for the entire season, which led him to get 20 to 30% of the snaps. But I don't really see the Packers going out and bending over backwards to bring him back on this roster for the simple reason that he is a good running back, 100% true, but we see a lot of these lower guys get moved around a ton. Like, he is a good enough running back to say that some team is going to want him as the RB2 on their team. He's a good second option. I just don't see the Packers going out and getting Marshawn Lloyd and also Josh Jacobs to keep Emmanuel Wilson in this mix. And in the event that he does stay, let's say that he is on the team next year, he comes back in 2025, it is definitely going to be a world where they're fighting for this number 2 spot. When Lloyd comes back off of IR, he's going to be healthy. There's still some hope and some reason to be stashing it. As for A.J. Dillon, he's probably going to be in free agency this year, move to a new team. He's going to get his last contract before he really starts to exit the NFL. That's all, again, pointing toward Lloyd being that draft security guy, which is why they got him in the 3rd round. At the very least, he's a candidate as a sell high when the fantasy season comes back around, because I promise you his value is going to go up when that happens. And you can also just stash him on your IR slot. There's no reason you shouldn't be putting him on your roster. But Jermaine Burton, despite all of his off the field situations, is a great sleeper if you are willing to take that chance that he could take himself out of the equation here. Another guy that's not the most proven kind of wide receiver. He's actually not really anywhere near that, but the Bengals drafted him in the 3rd round last year for him to barely get any playing time, finishing with 4 receptions, 107 yards on the season. And we look at his game logs. His highest snap percentage was at 48 against the Ravens in week 10, where he did manage to see 5 targets in that contest. That's not bad by any means, but besides that point, why I'm buying into him as a stash is because of the situation that he is in. The Bengals are one of the best offenses in the NFL. That's not really up for much of a debate. They're 1st in passing yards, 2nd in passing attempts, 1st in touchdowns, top 5 in all offense across the board. So the volume is always going to be king. When you have all of these passing attempts, it's going to be amazing for these even lower level kind of wide receivers, and we are likely not going to have T. Higgins returning to this team in the offseason. It's almost a guarantee at this point, at least in my opinion. He's going to test free agency and he's probably going to sign somewhere else. Why do you think the Bengals would go out and use a 3rd round pick on another wide receiver when you already have all of these guys in your roster? It's kind of just insinuating that T. Higgins probably won't return. He is an investment for that case, and that's the sort of non-fantasy football information we need to be looking for when we're talking about dynasty stashes. We need a path. That's the most important thing, and the Bengals just don't have the cap space to keep all of these guys. They're already swamped with a massive contract that Burrow's getting, and Chase is probably gonna, no, not probably, he will get a massive contract, probably be the number 1 highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. We already saw Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb reset that market at an insanely high value. He's gonna go get his money. Now, we're looking at a world where Burton can work his way up into the wide receiver 2 spot behind Jamar Chase. We know how valuable that role can be. Higgins out-targeted Chase in his healthy games this year, and that's mostly because teams are forced to throw double coverage at Jamar Chase, forced to take him out of these games, make somebody else beat them. When you have a really good number 2 option that could be a number 1 on another team in T. Higgins, he's gonna have a bunch of usage, and that's exactly what we've been seeing. Now we have the possibility of Jermaine Burton working into that role, leaving a huge hole on the other side of the field for him to take advantage of. Now, yes, Andre Yoshivas does exist. He has shined in his chances so far this year. He has a few touchdowns and a good amount of receptions, but this is still one of the situations where we buy into these low-level wide receivers that haven't proven a ton. He's playing with an MVP candidate in Joe Burrow. Again, he has a ton of off-field situational issues that could take him out of a 5-year window for Dynasty Fantasy Football, but again, he's a stash. You cut your ties if he doesn't turn out. But Ben Sinnott is a guy that has no long-term downside and a ton of potential if we're going to be stashing him. He is a guy that you should be getting if you do need a tight end. At the beginning of last season, he had a good amount of hype circulating his name with a young offense with some potential. Maybe Jane Daniels and him can grow together a little bit throughout the year. So he comes out, the team performs at one of the highest degrees we can expect. They go from 4 wins to 12, completely changing this entire offensive philosophy and the statistics from a year ago, but he doesn't really get any of that usage. It's a top 5 offense, but he was behind Zach Ertz for the entirety of the year and in the depth chart pretty easily. But Adam Peters did sign all of these guys, Zach Ertz included, to really short deals. Zach Ertz specifically a 1-year deal. He's going to finish that up with a $3 million contract as we speak for the year, and there is a really high chance that they bring him back with all of the success that he's had this year. But they drafted Ben Sinnott in the 2nd round of the NFL draft last season for a reason, and he fits this team's play style in a short underneath throws kind of scheme with a mix of deep shots to guys like Terry McLaurin or De'Ami Brown when he's healthy. But this guy is a 6'4 tight end. He runs a 4.6 40-yard dash. Look what happened 2 years ago. Zach Ertz goes down in week 7 for the Arizona Cardinals. Trey McBride steps into his place and absolutely dominates. Now look where he is now. Trey McBride is one of the better tight ends in the NFL and one of the best fantasy guys as well. Now Sinnott is nowhere near Trey McBride's level. I'm not expecting that to happen. If you look at his stats, he only had 4 receptions on the year, but stashing him is an extremely smart plan because of Zach Ertz's age. He's probably not going to stay with this team for a whole ton longer. Again, he does have that draft capital. Another free tight end though we can go out and pick up, and one that I'm really loving if you do need one, Eric All. Make him a priority stash. He comes out in the 4th round, a rookie from Iowa, instantly sees burn the second he touches the field. 24% of the snaps in his very first NFL game, follows that up with 52, 34, 60, and 52% of the snaps continually, all the way up until he gets injured in week 9. Then he lands on IR with a torn ACL, MCL. It's all bad. It's all terrible. He doesn't touch the field again. Naturally, this is going to make him at a bigger disadvantage, trying to work his way back in from a big injury. It is true, but it just makes him a guy that we can stash on our IR slot for free, especially looking at his first third of the season, he did perform. All that done right next to and behind Mike Gesicki, who the Bengals just brought in last year for a one-year deal. That deal is also going to be ending and needing to be restructured this season. They may or may not bring him back. I think it is likely, compared to all these other guys I'm talking about in this list, he probably does return to this team because of how good he played. But when Eric All was healthy before injury, there was not one negative statement about this guy. He thrives in the run blocking game. That alone is going to get tight ends on the field a ton and make you trust it and give you a lot more routes to run and opportunities. And unlike a lot of primary blocking tight ends, which is what we see a lot in the NFL, he actually did run a good amount of routes. He had 20 receptions in 8 healthy games. He was a rookie tight end too. And unlike a lot of primary blocking tight ends, he actually did get a good amount of routes run per game. He finished with 20 receptions in 8 healthy games as a rookie tight end 2 behind Mike Gesicki. Like, these are all positive numbers. Again, we know how good this offense is. That's all you need in Dynasty. The opportunity is there. The player can do the rest. Like, they're in the NFL for a reason. He's valued at the tight end 27. That's extremely low. Who else is even at that level? The answer is nobody. When you're playing with an MVP candidate in Joe Burrow, the offense is top 5 in every single statistic, top 3 in every passing statistic. You're going to carry some upside, even if he is coming off a big injury. Similar to Jermaine Burton, I just don't see a world where T. Higgins comes back to this offense from a business perspective and also just his perspective. He can get a lot more money somewhere else. And year after year, we see tight ends get a massive bump in usage and just general snaps when T. Higgins is not on the field. I go over this every single week on the redraft channel. If you guys are in those kinds of leagues and you do play, I highly recommend you check out that channel. I'll have it linked in the description below for you guys. All season, I was talking about every time T. Higgins is out, we put Mike Gesicki in our starting lineups. It paid off to the max degree almost every single time. It is true. It is what this offense does. Eric All can be getting that much more of a boost when that happens. But another pass catcher here we've all forgotten about is Roman Wilson. He does need to be stashed. The Steelers are desperately in need of a wide receiver 2 to step up. Van Jefferson is not doing it. Calvin Austin is not doing it. Mike Williams is not going to get it done. A likely reason the Steelers went out and drafted him out of Michigan with a 3rd round pick is because of this reason. They need somebody next to George Pickens, and he's barely rostered. And the reason for that as a wide receiver 79, again, is because of injuries. We see this be the plague of a lot of these players. He suffers an ankle injury early in training camp. He missed a ton of time. He was on IR. He actually never touched the field except for one game. He played 5 total snaps in week 6. The only problem with Roman Wilson, and this is a real issue, is that the Steelers are at a very high chance of going out and drafting another wide receiver in the 2025 NFL draft. There's a healthy amount of guys that are available where the Steelers are picking from. So when you're basing it off the team's needs, it's probably a smart idea for them to go ahead and do that. But all you really need is for Roman Wilson to be healthy and touch the field. I'm almost 100% certain he can and will earn a spot. Again, when training camp and preseason comes around next year, he's going to have that chance to prove himself. The coaching staff has already bought into him and has backed him as being one of their primary building guys for the future, even before the injuries and after the injuries. Yes, he does have that risk of fighting for the wide receiver 3 spot. Mike Williams probably won't return, and again, in the draft, we're going to get some guys, but that is going to finish out this video. Let me know if you guys are stashing these guys or who you have on the end of your bench. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one coming later next week. All glory to the man above.